Hey there, everyone. I recently ran across this article. It was just put out a couple days ago by Michael Snyder over at the Economic Collapse blog. And it's titled, "We Just Witnessed an Economic Sign That Hasn't Happened Since the Peak of the Great Depression in 1932. And this article, I wanted to go through a couple of the points in this article because it really is something I completely agree with. And while it doesn't go into a whole lot of detail about different things in this article, it does kind of bring up some alarming points that I want to go over. It also talks about the 1970s and how that went and some of the correlations between all of these different things. So the line we're getting told, while it may turn out that way, my thoughts are it's at least going to go in a bad direction, but how bad could it get? So in this article, Michael starts off, he talks about the economic conditions are much worse than we're being told. Throughout the past year, prices have been rising much faster than most of our incomes have. And as a result, our standard of living has been rapidly declining. It has become increasingly difficult for U.S. households to make it from month to month. And as you will see below, more than a third of all U.S. adults are actually relying on their parents to pay at least some of their bills at some point. But even more alarming is what's been happening to our real disposable income. And this is the part that concerns me. According to Fox Business, the most recent GDP report revealed that the decline in real disposable income that we witnessed in 2022 was the largest that's been measured since 1932, so the height of the Great Depression. And then goes on to say here, the most troubling information in the GDP report is the precipitous drop of real disposable income, which fell over $1 trillion in 2022. For context, that's the largest percentage drop in real disposable income ever, behind 1932, the worst year of the Great Depression. Now, to me, this is concerning because this is basically our ability to prep, right? This is the disposable income that we use for food storage, that we use for prepping supplies, and not just prepping. I mean, there's a lot of things that we use disposable income for, but that is our ability to be able to do those things. So as I've said a bunch of times, it's start prepping, do what you can as much as you can before all of this, before it just starts to go down and down and down. So it's just concerning to me that these are the things that we're sort of looking at heading into the later part of this year. Now, another thing that is interesting in this article, and he goes on to talk a little bit about a few other things, like how many young people are still living with their parents. More than 1/3 of adults admit they still have one bill paid by their parents. Some of them still live with their parents. But this is the part that I think is really interesting. According to one Wall Street economist, a looming recession this year will feel more like the 70s rather than 2008-07 slump. People are too focused on 2008 and 2020. This is more like 1973-74, Nancy Lazar said on Morning with Maria. Lazar predicted feeling the full impact of the recession in the second half of 2023 as lag effects of the Federal Reserve hikes take hold, which I absolutely agree with, because you've seen now some of the things they did in the 70s, they quote unquote learned a few things from that, but the rate hikes are still going on, and it's their attempt to sort of salvage the economy. We are going to see the impacts of that here in the next few months. Now, during the 70s, there was stagflation was a huge deal, and this is something we don't hear about enough, I think, these days. So in this article, they talk about a few different, and I'll make sure and link to this below, but they talk about a few key points with the things that happened in the 1970s. And as you read through these, there's a lot of correlation between then and now. Stagflation in the 70s combined high inflation with disappointingly uneven economic growth, high budget deficits, go figure, low interest rates, oil embargoes, and the collapse of managed currency rates were among the main causes of stagflation. by letting high inflation expectations set in, the Federal Reserve raised the cost of bringing them under control later. And that's where, when I was talking about they've learned a few things from the 70s, they're trying to make sure they don't make the same mistakes as the 70s. But it's all, I think just an educated guess. So the Fed under Paul Volcker raised interest rates above 19% to get inflation down, precipitating a steep economic downturn. So right now you're seeing a bunch of minor rate hikes, but all, cumulative as they add up together. It's still, they're just trying to kind of turn that dial up a little bit. And I'm no economist. And, all of this stuff is, I know it's a very hard job to try to even out an economy, but still, all of this stuff, it's right there if you choose to look at it, I think. Inflationary pressures subsequently eased as oil prices and union employment fell, limiting the growth of costs and wages. So in the 70s, as this article goes on to talk about, you had the fuel prices. We've all seen, a lot of us have grown up. We were children in the 70s, so we really didn't see the effects of this stuff as we would see it as adults. But we all have seen pictures of the lines at the gas stations and stuff like that. So fuel prices were an issue back then, just like they are now. Stagflation basically is the increased cost of goods while your wages stay the same, basically, and everything just kind of stays the same except for the price of everything. And it goes into a lot more detail than that. But that's another thing we're sort of experiencing at this point right now. And going into 2023, the second half of 2023, I just don't see how it gets any better. So I think it's more of a how bad is it going to get than is it going to get better. The other, one more article on the 70s right here. In the early 1970s, the post-World War II economic boom began to wane due to increased international competition, the expense of the Vietnam War, and the decline of manufacturing jobs. So all three of those sort of put up red flags to me, because we've seen in the past decade or so this economic boom where everything has been great and everybody's happy, and then we've seen all these expenses from all these endless wars. We've seen the decline in manufacturing jobs. We've seen the rise in spending from governments with these social welfare programs. The COVID, throwing money around to everybody during COVID is one of the big ones, which is a big reason why we are in the boat we are in now, in my opinion. Unemployment rates rose while the combination of price increases and wage stagnation led to a period of economic doldrums known as stagflation. So that's basically what I was talking about. Stagflation is everything goes up, but your wages don't. So your spending ability goes down, even though you're at the same exact level. President Nixon tried to alleviate these problems by devaluing the dollar and declaring wage and price freezes. They made a lot of mistakes in the 70s, basically. And that's what some of these economists these days and the people who run the central banks and all that are trying to, keep under control, learn from their past mistakes. This is, one of the reasons, one of their reasons why they thought it was necessary to go off the gold standard. Some people say that was a good thing. I don't choose to believe that. And there's no real way to know if things would have gotten as bad as they thought they were going to if we would have just stayed on the gold standard. But you've seen over the past few decades how they've completely jacked that stuff up, and how when you give them complete control, it becomes a game for them and against us, or we're an afterthought with all of this stuff. So. And finally on this, the crisis was compounded when oil-rich nations in the Middle East declared an embargo against the United States in retaliation for its support on Israel. And this sort of reminds me of the stuff that's going on in Ukraine right now, where the fuel going to different places. And I know all of these aren't exactly the same, but they're all pretty interesting to me. The correlations between, maybe not necessarily the Great Depression, but there are some there, but the 1970s, and sort of trying to some sort of educated guess to try to figure out where all of this stuff is going. So back over to this economic collapse blog. What he says here in the end is actually sort of how I feel about this whole thing. He says, actually, it would be quite wonderful if her seemingly gloomy forecast was accurate about this being more like the 70s. Because I don't believe we're headed into a downturn like she explained during the early 70s. Rather, I see all sorts of evidence that indicates we're in the very early stages of an economic equivalent of the big one. I believe that things will get very rough this year, and believe that the long-term outlook is even worse. Now, a day of reckoning has arrived, and we will get to suffer the consequences of their very foolish decisions. Now, with this, I completely get all of this. I completely think that is, I mean, we just don't know how exactly all of this stuff is going to unfold coming up in the next 6 months or so, right? But I can completely see his point here, because we really don't know. I can see it getting really bad, even though you've got the talking heads saying that this is going to be fine, or it's going to be rough, but we're going to be okay. And you've got these people in the Fed and all these people making these decisions based on things that they've learned in the past. So it is possible that maybe they know how to kind of equalize this economy, but I just don't see that. I'm just not that confident in all of that stuff, with the reckless spending, with the reckless decisions that are being made, with the decisions that are being made more for certain people's benefits rather than the country's benefit these days. I just am not all that convinced that we're going to come out fine with all this. It's going to be rough, tighten your belt a little bit. It's going to be rough. I think it could get far worse than that. How far does that go? I mean, I really don't know. I don't think any of us really know, but I'm doing the best I can right now as far as preparedness is concerned to kind of get to the point where if there are certain things that I can't afford, I'm not going to have to worry about that so much, and I can actually pay the rising electricity bill, the gas bill, all of these different things that we're not going to be able to do that we used to do just say a year ago. The expendable income aspect of it, like I said, that's the most concerning to me, because that's our ability to maintain our lifestyle. That's our ability to prep. That's our ability to, have fun with the family and do the things that we're used to doing. And those things aren't going to be, it's going to be a struggle to just keep the lights on for a lot of people in this country. So, and it could get far worse than that. So I'm pretty sure all of you sort of agree, have the same sentiments about this. Cross your fingers and see. But if you have anything that I didn't add, or any thoughts or anything, I'll leave the links to the articles I shared here today in the description below. But like I said, if you have any thoughts or anything, make sure to leave a comment. If you like this video or any of my other videos, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. And with that, take care and prepare, everyone. We'll talk to you all later.